Today we are talking about new regulations under the UK Online Safety Act, which has prompted an explosion in VPN app downloads as porn website age checks kick in. Following that, we spill the tea about the T app leak. Unfortunately, this is not a discussion about tea at Fortnum's. It's another data leak, this time of incredibly sensitive information. Welcome to the Internet Seriously. Hello, I'm Lucien Taylor in Oxford, and as an engineer I'm really interested in what my two colleagues here think about the new rules that are in place under the UK's Online Safety Act and the resultant spate of VPN app downloads to watch porn, and also more about this T app leak.
I'm Emily Taylor, and as a policy expert or digital policy, I've been in the digital policy arena for 20 plus years. I'm always fascinated by the perverse consequences of tech policy, and I think we've got a few examples to discuss today with the Online Safety Act and age verification rules that have come into force this week.
And I'm Alice Taylor, and as a former speech and language therapist, I'm really interested in how the Online Safety Act demonstrates the way that we always get it wrong when it comes to protecting young people online.
Okay, thanks. So lots to talk about today. Before we kick off, please like or share or follow us online. The buttons are appearing in front of Alice right now, and please listen to our podcast and comment as well. We need your comments, and particularly if you're interested in the internet seriously. So, Emily, give us a quick summary of the UK Online Safety Act. What is this? Why did we need it?
This is my horror as a lawyer, a former lawyer. This feels like my law exam of the week. Being a former lawyer, I still know how to caveat things. I'm not an expert in this area.
Rubbish.
But what I can say is that the Online Safety Act actually was received royal assent in 2023. That makes it a law passed by and developed under the previous government. It is 286 pages long and 241 sections. There's an estimated 1,500 pages of guidance so far published by the regulator.
Guidance, what does that mean?
So a lot of the detail, unbelievably, in a nearly 300-page long act, a lot of the detail is actually pushed off into guidance that's being developed all the time. And Ofcom, as the regulator, is actually responsible for that guidance. And not only is there 1,500 pages so far, lots of guidance still to come, a lot of those pages sort of intersect with one another and with different areas of the Act. So the other thing to say about the Online Safety Act is that it had an incredibly long gestation period. So the first, as it was then, the Online Harms Bill was first published back in 2017.
Wow.
2017, and I remember going in and briefing government on the anxieties of the day in 2017, which were all about electoral interference.
I mean,
that eventually didn't make
have
it into
things
this.
like AI in 2017?
Well,
what were we doing in 2017?
Well, think about it. Actually, even since the law has passed in 2023, I think we can say our use of generative AI in 2023 was nowhere near what it is every day now. And the understanding of policymakers and people and industry of what generative AI could do was very theoretical back in 2023, whereas now we're starting to see it in real life. And that's just an example, Luce, of the way that, policy is always behind technology. But I've seen a lot of... so why is everybody talking about the Online Safety Act this week? Because it's been law for 2 years. So what? The fact is it's so complicated and there's so many different aspects. So it deals with terrorism content, child sexual abuse material, hate speech, promotion of suicide or self-harm, incitement to violence, and fraudulent advertising. So those are all classified as illegal content, okay? But there is another category of content which is lawful, but to certain types of users is harmful.
So porn.
Porn for children. Porn for adults, not so harmful. Porn for children, harmful. And that was in that, nearly, 8 years of policy debate prior to the law coming into effect, the legal but harmful types of provisions were the most controversial, the most troubling
challenging
to civil society activists, to human rights experts who
It's
warned
also
of
interesting
its chilling
because
impact.
I'm thinking about, for example, us talking about stuff like CSAM and stuff like porn might get censored on some
Just
social
the
media
talking-
just
just us
saying it,
talking
just us
about
talking about it, and
using
we're
those-
discussing it from a kind of research, from a news perspective, and it's like in some cases really upsetting footage, say of like war crimes happening, is important to be viewed and to be public because it's important for freedom of speech, for information, for people to know what's happening. But for most people, watching those things is not appropriate and could be really upsetting.
And Alice, just picking up on some of this, so we've got this act. I mean, I'm interested in your view of, is it reasonable in the internet generation to actually take 6 years to develop rules that protect people without some sort of emergency regulations being tried and tested first? If you're harming people, you're harming people. Why sit in a law office for 6 years and talk about it?
Well,
But I understand that the new regulations are part of the UK's Online Safety Act, that they've come officially into effect. They are the bits that are to protect children from harmful content, and they're required to implement particularly robust age verification systems. So is it reasonable to take so long? And what do you think about this sort of age verification at what we're talking about is the front page of porn sites?
yeah, well, isn't it so interesting? It's like they've taken 6 years to figure it out, and look at the backlash the second it's come into force. VPN downloads in the UK have increased by, I think, over 1,000%. And, the last time I checked, the petition to the government to reverse the Online Safety Act had surpassed, I think, 300,000 people, and it's growing every day. Usually governments respond to a petition when they get over 100,000 signatures. So this is really, people are really angry about this.
And
They're
aren't we
really
haven't
passionate.
we been hearing people, there's a lot of polemic coming even from I really understand the problem on all sides. I really think this is enormously challenging, and you do have to protect young people.
Well, it's also striking because it's like we work in digital policy, and so most of our lives is like, you say, I work in digital policy, and people are like, oh, okay, and they don't really know. And it's like something like the Online Safety Bill 2023, no one would have heard of. But this, everyone's heard about
Emily,
the Online Safety Act.
Didn't a minister say earlier this week, if you're against the act, you're for harmful content targeting younger people? I'm trying to avoid the algorithm.
I mean, this is so unfortunate. I think we should be starting
I live with you.
We should be starting.
When you say unfortunate, we're in trouble.
Yeah. So we should be starting from the perspective of everybody has a right to feel safe online, and children and other groups that are at risk need to be protected by societies. I think I don't feel that that's controversial, and I also think over the last 20 years societies haven't done a fantastic job of protecting young people, and I'm really interested in what Alice has to say about this. I actually spent some time reading the guidance published by Ofcom on age verification, and it's really thoughtful. It's also citing research. New research is that 8% of children aged 8 to 14 in the UK visited a porn site in the last month. 3% of 8 to 9-year-olds, and now there is actively seeking out that sort of content.
I've heard research of children under 4,
Being exposed.
lots of children have encountered very, very graphic stuff online.
So do we think this is great?
Of course not.
No, of course not. Do we think something should be done about it? Yes. Do we think that the burden should be carried by children themselves or their parents and caregivers who probably understand very little about what's going on? No. Why shouldn't the burden be shared through society, and particularly by those who have the technical capability and financial resources to do something? Isn't it a pity that we as society need any rules? Why can't we all just love each other and be reasonable? But the fact is, this stuff happens and it is harming people. And there's also the sort of young people being drawn to sites containing, promoting eating disorders or self-harm with really terrible results. And these are not unlawful content. These are harmful to young people.
Can I?
It's difficult to do.
Can I
this
throw
properly.
another thing in? And I know we want to move on as well to the Wikipedia legal case where they're kind of. Everyone's now starting to test this. I'm talking about this as an engineer.
Yes,
okay?
good.
I love the idea of what we're trying to do, and in a kind of way, it's kind of analogous to the GDPR, protecting your privacy. We are now in a world where everybody's privacy is completely exploited by the exploitation of those effective measures that were put in place to protect us. The paradoxical nature, because the technical solution was not there and is still not there with cookie notices. I don't think that what Ofcom is asking for, highly effective age reassurance measures, I don't think there's a technology there for us to trust, or consumers to trust, porn companies and providers and internet infrastructure providers to maintain safe methods of age verification. If you're turning up and showing a bouncer in a nightclub your passport or your driving license, that's very different because that's an immediate physical act. If you're delivering passport and driving license information to an organisation where I imagine you don't want people to know you've ever been there because you're ashamed of that, I think there's some huge challenges that just haven't been addressed. Now, Ofcom has already launched formal investigations into 34 pornography websites operated by 4 major companies, and they will scrutinise whether platforms have past tense implemented highly effective age reassurance measures, and they face penalties of 10% of their global annual revenue. Now, somebody told me once as an engineer, the whole of the internet is funded by porn. So this sounds to me like they're going to be investigated, they're going to fail, and the government is facing a 10% revenue from the porn industry for some time. They're going to be loaded, aren't they?
Maybe this is how you do growth in the UK as a policymaker. Could I just react to one aspect of what you were saying? Is I think that the combination of incredibly complex law, hundreds of pages, thousands of pages of guidance, plus turnover-based fines, leads to, we know what happens with this because we've seen it over the last nearly 10 years with GDPR. Companies will take an incredibly conservative approach, and what's at stake here is freedom of expression. Getting it wrong ends up with lots and lots of societal harms, as well as the harms that you're trying to combat. You end up in a very perverse and paradoxical situation. Like if you were, as a policymaker, thinking, how do I motivate teenagers to download virtual private and use, strong encryption and protect their privacy online? You would think, I know, let's pass this 300-page law about something completely different. So porn VPNs were probably not top of the list. I think that probably the government is surprised at the backlash, and also 1,800%.
Well, there was I think it's been a kind of one of these misinformation things that tornadoes into something bigger, but lots of speculation about banning VPNs, which isn't going to happen. I think the government have said, we are not going to ban VPNs, but it's still like the fact that they had to it's
and
quite funny.
Alice, I'm surprised that they're surprised at this VPN thing, because
Yeah.
young boys get round things. And I think if this just creates a generation of hackers who learn about VPNs and access to things that they're not going to have, I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest paradoxical outcomes. And this comes to another thing, and I think it takes us into the Wikipedia discussion, is how do we tackle the divide between techies and policymakers? I do see, as a techie, a lot. I mean, we work a lot with government. I have great respect for policymakers. Emily's works with a lot of policymakers and researchers. But those communities are just generically polarized. They just work in their own community. Techies are very kind of the spectrum, black and white. If you say something and we've got to do it, we'll do it, even if it's complete nonsense. Policymakers are much more nuanced and like, well, we
on
didn't,
the one hand this, on the other hand
we didn't
this.
really mean that. It's not very, they don't seem to have heard of binary, which the techies have been taught about binary, and it's either a one or a naught, and they feel very uncomfortable with that. This is not really a one or a naught, you know. And I know there's
we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see in
we'll
practice.
see, and and they're terrified of being in the we'll see group, which sort of takes us on to. But Alice, young people, how are we going to bridge this divide between the sort of technological extremity and the policy nuance, sort of, almost club-like warmth about, I hear that the government are going to have just working class people as interns in government as internships. Is that going to solve it, to sort of get more people who are just like really doing background techie work into policy making?
I was interested in where you started at the top of the show, is like, we keep getting it wrong with protecting young people. How could we get it right?
Yeah, it's a really complicated question. I think I'm a policymaker researcher, so I'm like, on the one hand,
let's do a role play.
Okay, so let's say I've got a magic wand.
It's up to you, Alice.
I've got a magic wand, okay, and I can redesign the internet, and I have power over the whole world. I think what I would do, and this is probably quite controversial, there'll be lots of people that would disagree with me, this is just my personal imaginary thing. I think we need a small, highly, highly regulated, very safe internet that is really easy to use. And around that, a more kind of Wild West internet that is less regulated and is more difficult to use. And make that smaller internet something that's really welcoming and really safe for young people, where they're going to be safe. It's almost like how YouTube changed to be, you have to opt in for your content to be for children. It's got to really pass this high threshold of criteria. And I think, there's been a lot of controversy around that, but I think that is quite a good model, because it's like, make it easy for content creators to just upload their content, and it's like automatically it's not for kids, it's not going to be shown to kids. If you want it to be for children, you've got to work really hard to prove that your content is safe, and that's the only stuff that children can access.
Fascinating, and that takes me with a very vulgar bridge into the Wikipedia classification argument, which as a taxonomy designer and database engineer, I'm fascinated by this discussion. And again, having conversations with policy people, it gets immediately to, well, it's not meant to really be like that. It wasn't meant to be about them. Their argument is that part of the Act's categorization regulations could wrongly classify Wikipedia as a Category 1 service. And so they are actually raising a legal battle with the UK government, arguing that certain requirements of the Online Safety Act could endanger the privacy of its volunteer contributors, but also the misapplication of the one-size-fits-all regulation. How could they be caught by what they call Category 1 services categorization, which puts them in the same bag as the big platform providers, the Metas?
Can I explain the sort of the Category 1, Category 2? So the Online Safety Act outlines, that different types of sites have different responsibilities. So a Category 1 content provider is a site that averages over 7 million users within the UK, must user content recommendation system, so algorithms, and must allow users to share generated content. So something like Wikipedia ticks all those boxes.
all the boxes.
Whereas then like category 2 is sort of like, a bit lower usage, a bit websites where you maybe search for things, and then category 2B is user to user service, but smaller.
So Emily, let's role play.
Okay.
You're a judge and we're raising a legal case with you. On one side, we've got the UK government saying we need to protect children, okay? And what we're saying is with our laws, any platform online that ticks one of the following 2 boxes is a category 1 provider. High user numbers and content recommender systems. Check. Number 2, significant user numbers and content spreading functionalities. Check. Wikipedia's lawyers say we tick both of those boxes. So by that definition, and we know that Ofcom have to agree and put us in that bracket, but by any reading of that, we are in that category 1 definition. Would you say as a judge, and I'm interested in what you would say, would a judge say, yeah, but it's not meant to be for people like Wikipedia?
I don't know what a judge would say. I'm not a judge, thank goodness. However, I think a judge would go back to the law, which says you're not a category 1 unless Ofcom designates you as one.
I see.
And these are the characteristics that they have to satisfy for category 1. So they can't just go out into the street and point at someone and say, you're a category 1 provider.
And I'm right in thinking that at the moment, actually nothing yet has been designated as category 1.
And I would be very surprised
if you need to use Face ID authentication to use Wikipedia.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if Wikipedia was designated as category 1. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. We've just been through the checklist. But the safeguard for the crazy, absurd outcome of Wikipedia having to comply with Online Safety Act provisions, the safeguard is that it's the regulator who designates. So it has to fulfill their legislative and regulatory objectives. It has to actually pose risks of harm. And I don't hear any sort of any of the policy debate around, oh my God, we've got to do something about Wikipedia, because actually it seems to be very well self-governed. There are definitely criticisms that scholars make of Wikipedia. The editorial volunteers are overwhelmingly male. Content from females overwhelmingly, disproportionately gets obliterated. But, these are different issues from the sort of stuff that the Online Safety Act was there for. So for this, fair play to Wikipedia, good on them for highlighting the potentially absurd outcomes of this law. As I say, any law that is 300 pages long and more than 240 provisions long is going to be so complex that most of the people affected by it will never read it. But I'm really interested in what you're saying, Alice, that there's already a storm, and I'm already being lectured by people who've never read the Act either on what it says. And that's the sort of mythologizing that comes about with overly complex laws, and that itself is a problem.
But we have had discussions with people that we know. Eleanor Dew's King's Counsel was on this podcast saying that GDPR wasn't written for the way that it's being interpreted. It wasn't written with that in mind. But Alice, once the crowd's taken something, it's on fire, isn't it? I mean, does it really matter what the lawyers and the policymakers and the good faith behind it says? The crowd is shouting, are they not?
Well, I think GDPR is a really great example of where it's almost like things are interpreted so generally the wrong way. There's Lord Laming in 2009, when writing about child protection, said, things like GDPR, data protection laws, were never meant to be interpreted as prohibiting information sharing when it comes to, safeguarding vulnerable people. They were never meant to be taken this way, but that is so widely done that it's like the norm. And I feel like with the UK Online Safety Act, the way that we've got porn VPNs just skyrocketing, just shows petitions. People
legal
are angry.
cases that are quite hopeless. It's too early to do that legal case, but they're doing it, and I agree.
I think
with
it's
you.
performative, the legal
Well,
case.
or marketing.
Yeah.
Anyway, Alice, you have a couple of questions for people listening. This is going to roll and roll, I feel, but just to wrap up this.
Yeah, so do you think that the UK government is overstepping with the Online Safety Act, or do you think they've got the balance right? And what would you do to fix the internet and to protect young people online?
Thank you very much. So next up is we've got a new thing for everybody. This is a world first. Where this will become so popular that in time you'll come back to this episode and go, this is when they were discussing the UK Online Safety Act, and then a new thing that they're doing, because without a guest, we don't want to keep doing Guilty Pleasure Online and Tech Room 101. We love it when we've got a guest because we get secrets about them. People who used to work in secret services talking about filling in forms with dummy data and stuff. All sorts of...
or their BBC journalists' tattoos.
Yeah, so we love that with guests. But we're a bit stuck to think of more and more Guilty Pleasures online without going into the deepest, darkest secrets. So we have a new thing. It's called Doom Scroll of the Week. And there you go. And I promise you next week, hopefully there'll actually be some things that you're scrolling to.
I'm excited about what's coming into those.
And some music. But anyway, Doom Scroll is the week. Basically gives us a chance to have a quick chat about any old rubbish. So we're going to start with this week with Alice's volunteering a Doom Scroll of the week.
So to me, Doom Scroll of the Week is like, what do you love to hate? What do you kind of, it's like something that just makes you kind of like, but you just can't stop watching. You can't look away. So my Doom Scroll of the Week is men who hate women's football. It is an endless...
What?
You know, if you're interested in men who hate women's football, there is so much content for you out there.
Now,
because,
am I right? There's quite a big event this
yeah, so
week
the
that's just
Lionesses
happened.
have won the Women's Euros.
How can
the
this...
victory.
And
what I've noticed
this is
on...
not just Spanish men.
No, this is everybody. This is like
there were
UK,
losers last
lots
week.
and lots of UK men who hate women's football. They are really angry. They are very insecure. And so what I've noticed is on TikTok, you'll get a video of like, you know, an amazing goal from Chloe Kelly. And it's always in the replies to the comments. So it'll be like a comment saying like, the women are better at football, 300 replies, and you open it and it's just the most dreadful, you know, like stuff about men's biological superiority, like the men's team should play the women's team because they will defeat them, they will crush them, you know, giving these one or two examples where like the women's team of a country have, as part of training, done like a charity match with some under-15s. And the under-15 boys defeated the women's team. And that's like an example that proves,
Emily,
that women can't play football.
We can't dig too much. This is obviously something we're going to have to revisit. But just trying to think of a question for future listeners is... And let's not really talk to the men who hate women here, because, you know, we know that there are lots of haters out there. But do you have a question for anyone listening to that really reflects the problem here?
I would like to ask people to comment on how they love women's football and how proud they are of the Lionesses for doing such an incredible job in winning the Euros.
Showing the men how to do it?
Showing everybody how to win a football match.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm just
wonderful
saying
stuff.
the men haven't won anything this century.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we're trying to get away from polemic, and so I like the sort of...
I'm not the one making it.
Everyone's super
I liked
people online.
I liked Serena. Is it Serena Wiegman, the manager, dancing and doing her rap?
Yeah, very nice, very
beautiful.
nice. We'll get a good video of that later. Next up, we've got a shorter topic about T-App suffers major data breach exposing sensitive information. This is a controversial woman-only app, T-Dating Advice app, which has been the centre of a significant data security scandal and has resulted in a mass exposure of sensitive user data, including personal photographs, ID identification documents. You know, we're now talking about verifying people's ID and their age, and has sparked a widespread concern and class action lawsuit. I mean, Emily, the breaches go on and on. You can imagine this is really a safety app for women. And what's been put into the public domain, and I'll talk a little afterwards about the technical breach itself, because that's actually
Can I explain a bit about what the T-app is
Yes,
and
please
why
do.
the T-app leak is such a disaster? So the T-app, it's sort of like a red flag sharing app. What does that mean? It started, it was inspired by there are Facebook groups called Are We Dating the Same Man? Kind of funny in concept, where it's like you share a picture of your new boyfriend. Are we dating the same man? And 4 women go, yes, watch out for that guy. It's a bit of a kind of like a warning system.
In the
and
global
actually,
signal exchange, we've actually heard stories through the Global Anti-Scam Alliance of terrible stories of women being scammed by a lover who's met them online and actually spent time living with them. And this was a famous case in Australia, and he was living with multiple people at the same time, and going to work at different times
and scamming them out of millions of pounds. Well, the T app was actually started by a man called Sean Cook in 2022, and he realised that, so his mother had started doing online dating, and he said, I was shocked by how easy it was for catfishers, scammers and criminals to take advantage of women on dating apps, and was concerned by how little traditional dating apps do to protect their users. So he wanted to create a sort of network where women could exchange information and be like, is this guy, is he a hacker? Is he a scammer? Or is he a real person who, I can actually have a good relationship with? But I think it was really interesting earlier when we were talking about the Online Safety Act, you saying, well, what happens if, we have people's very personal, like, identity documents and verification documents being made public, and unfortunately that is what has happened.
Emily,
with this.
isn't this an example of the potential pitfalls of rushing into online dating, online verification technology? 72,000 images, including 13,000 selfies and photo IDs.
So women holding their photo ID.
1.1 million private messages between the app users, and made it possible to identify real-world identities of women or men that they're concerned about, who may be completely innocent men, and they're just we agree with the whole principle of signal sharing worries, sharing concerns amongst vulnerable
even if
groups.
it turns out to be
be
fine.
benign.
From what Alice is saying, this sounds like an incredibly needed and interesting and nurturing type of environment. But then the cybersecurity aspects are really troubling here. And yes, I think we're all making links back to the UK Online Safety Act here, and the calls that I've been hearing for 20 years about mandatory know your customer, mandatory identification and verification, and faced with these new burdens and turnover-based fines, companies are going, I don't want to do that, and they're shoving it to other companies. And
Sort
none of us know who these
verification
companies are.
apps,
The third-party identity verification apps, and they're not regulated, and this has become a huge sort of gap in the system. Is like everybody's stuff is being held by organisations that nobody knows very much about.
Very quickly, this was a big criticism of the UK Online Safety Act, is that rather than, everyone's like, well, are you going to make a centralised government ID verification app or a centralised government VPN? I mean, I don't think they would, but definitely a verification app. And no, it's just outsourced to
I want to
providers.
talk a bit about the actual leak itself, because this is, from my point of view as an engineer, is astonishing. But then we are moving into an era where we don't just want a company whose remit is to look after women to protect their personal information. We're now wanting porn marketers to protect people's personal information. What happened was they've got what's called a Firebase, which is a storage device in the cloud, a bucket where you can put documents into, was not protected by any form of identification. So it was like an open storage for people to go and help themselves, as though you were going into a Google Drive or a Dropbox folder that's public and can get personal data from. They also had an open AI system where any API system, application program interface, which robotic by queries using language like JSON scripts can actually deliver services via not just directly via web pages, but any authenticated user could access that. So just any consumer of the T app product could go in there and exploit a flaw in the API to gain direct access to messages between users. And their whole culture of vibe coding was relying upon AI generated code without any kind of security reviews. And the problem, folks, with generating code by AI, it's really good for sort of boilerplate and stubbing out, but don't use it as your final code. You know, it needs to be reviewed and thought about, because it can introduce significant vulnerabilities. But furthermore, and I'm interested, the presence of older verification photos by women on the system meant that they were not adhering to their own privacy policy document to destroy documents. So there was a lot of old pictures and stuff that they promised to get rid of.
Shouldn't have existed at all.
So, questions for the audience. Doesn't the T app leak raise concerns about the reality of online verification in practice?
Yeah, and also I'd like to ask people for their views on, is it our fault that we're sending on our personal information, pictures of our passports, to companies and people we hardly know? It doesn't sound great, Luz, the T-app hack, the tech side.
Well, and I hope they survive as a service for women. Alice, finally, comments. Have we picked up any comments today? What we're trying to do each week is actually engage with any live comments, and that takes a while to build up your crowd. If not, we can wrap up.
So when it comes to live comments, I haven't been able to find any today, but we do have a comment on our video from Joe Tidy, who's the first ever BBC cybersecurity correspondent, who was our guest last week. And he confessed in his Guilty Pleasure Online that he loves looking at botched tattoos. And then he told us that he has a tattoo, but somebody has commented, disappointed we didn't see the tattoo itself. And I've got to agree, because Joe didn't show us his tattoo, he just talked about it. And we asked, can we see the tattoo?
Yeah. We've got to get him back on.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We shall pass that on to Joe Tidy, international renowned BBC correspondent with tattoo,
and we best-selling author.
Show us your tattoo.
We'll try and get a pic. Today we've been talking about new regulations under the UK Online Safety Act, and following that, the T app leak. Thank you very much.